this morning's Open Digital Planning Show and Tell. We've got some updates from both PlanX and BoPs this morning. And as I say, it's really tight. There's a lot to talk about, so I won't waste time with small talk and chit chat. We'll get straight to it. And first off, we'll go to Holly, I think, for the Consultations discovery.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Holly. I'm from Unboxed. I'm a designer on BoPs. I'm just going to give you a very quick couple of sort of like highlights from the Consultations discovery piece that we've just wrapped up. There's, do you want me to share my screen, or are you happy to carry on? Is that all right?
You can take control if you want, Holly.
Oh, well, I'm quite happy for you to just carry on. I've just got slides.
Yeah. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, we'll do a full in-depth sort of like playback with the full report and all of the design concepts next Wednesday. So if you'd like to come to that, there'll be a lot more detail in that session there. This is just very quick highlights. So the purpose of this was that piece of work was that within BoPs, we are now moving into some new application types. So we're just picking up some prior approvals. And as part of these new application types that we want to start building, we need to include consultations. We've not had that before. So this piece of work was aimed at just understanding that process and any particular pain points and how it works. So next slide, please. We've broken them down, consultations down by type of application, and these are the 3 types of prior approvals that we've prioritised to start building for now. So for prior approvals, larger home extensions, for consultation, we need to send letters to neighbours. For prior approval, agricultural to domestic use, we need to send request to a small handful of statutory bodies. For prior approval, commercial to domestic use, we need to send letters to neighbours. We need to do a site notice and then also consult the same small handful of statutory bodies. And then when it comes to householder, which we're hoping to get to after those 3 types of prior approvals, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. So we still need to do letters to neighbours, a site notice. We may need to do a press notice. And then there's a much larger pool of consultees that we might need to request a response from, and we've currently broken that down into statutory, so legal bodies who need to legally consult, local requirements, so that would be bodies that we need to consult from the local authority policy perspective. Discretionary would be bodies that the planning officer knows they should consult, which might be local action groups or other ones that they feel are relevant to that application type. And then we've also included project specific, so that might be if we know that it's a basement conversion, you might need to consult certain type bodies, and if it's a loft, it would be different ones. So it's kind of relevant to the project, and I'll show you a couple of concepts for each of these things now. Thank you. So the first one is for letters to neighbours. Next slide, please. So first of all, we are now actually working on having a map in BoPs where you can see neighbour addresses. We're doing that by integrating with OS Places API, so we can double check that we've got the right house number and address for the adjoining neighbours, which is very exciting to see it getting started already. And the other thing is that BoPs is integrated with Gov Notify, so we can hit the button to send the letters, and we can print and send the letters directly through Notify. Here you can see some ideas around uploading the responses. So when we enter responses into BoPs, we may be able to add some tags around whether it's an objection, neutral, in support, and also potentially around some key themes. So when you come to review them, you'll know whether there's been a lot of concern around overshadowing or privacy, for example. Next slide, please. And then this was definitely one for a bit further down the line, but thought it would be exciting to include anyway. It's been a lot of talk about redaction, and so we are talking about how this might be possible and exploring APIs for kind of like automatically detecting a few different words, and that's the thing. But again, as I said, it's a little bit further down the line. But yeah, definitely something we're considering. When it comes to sending consultee requests, so this is specifically where we have 3 consultees we know we need to request responses from. Next slide, please. So by integrating with PlanX's prior approvals and planning portal, we should know what application type we're looking at, and therefore BoPs will be able to identify which are the correct consultees that we need to send a response to. And one of the consultees is the Environment Agency, so that's dependent whether the property is in a flood zone, and we can get that information by integrating with the Environment Agency. So that's great. And then here you can see, like, another thing we're looking at is clearly displaying the time left in the consultation period, so that the officer will know how much longer they've got the case for. And also looking at simple ways for the officer to be able to extend the consultation period or resend requests if they haven't had a response yet. At the moment, we are probably looking at a slightly more manual way of putting in responses. So potentially copying or pasting or uploading documents does mean that if we can copy and paste text, that it will be in data, not document form, which would be great, but we will have an option to include documents as well. And again, here you can see including tags, so you can kind of see quite directly whether comments are in support, neutral, or where they haven't responded yet. And then finally in the full householder one, so this encompasses all the other things we've I've talked you through already, but obviously there's a lot more constraint layers that might be involved here, and so we can look at integration with the Environment Agency, as I mentioned, and Planning Data Gov.uk have a lot of the other constraint layers that we should be able to use to help identify what will be the correct consultees for this for each application. We're exploring whether we need to have talks with GIS experts to understand how those layers might work. And we're also having very early discussions about whether we might be able to create our own constraint layers, so for local groups, things like that. And then finally, this is just to show how a project-specific consultee might be identified. So we can use the information coming from PlanX and through the application to understand what the application is about, we think. And that means we should be able to highlight when there is a specific consultee that might need to be requested. So in this case, the application work is about a basement. So you need to consult the highways department. So just being able to use a bit more contextual information to find the right consultees. Yeah, that's pretty much me, really. So just to let you know, the final and full playback will be hopefully next Wednesday at 2:30. We have a user testing session booked in with quite a few people, but we'll extend the invite, so anyone who wants to come, very welcome to come for the full playback. And what we'll be doing next is, as I said, we've prioritized these 3 types of prior approvals: the larger home extension, agricultural and commercial to domestic use. And we're starting to work on those right now. And we will be incorporating these consultation flows into that and testing them as part of those wider flows, so they're within the context. And we will be continuing to explore all the various integrations that we need in order to make this all possible. Yeah, so that's me, and I think I'm handing over to Evangelos to talk about integrations further. Or immunity, sorry.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to demo some additional steps that we added on the assessment stage of the planning officer and the reviewer statement of the reviewer. Let me share quickly my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as you can see, the very first difference is here that the planning application type is lawfulness development certificate with existing, and that means that this application might be immune from enforcement. Now, in application checks, we also added the evidence of immunity, which is a very new page where you can see all the applicant information that already provided, and the additional documents which proves that this planning application might be already existing. Now, the assessor, when is doing the assessment, they can tick whether they can find any missing documents, and they can request the new documents to them. Although if, and also added comments, although if they think that these documents are fine, they can save and mark as complete, which is a very similar pattern that they are doing in BoPs. The additional step that we added is about the immunity and permitted development rights. So in this page, they are going to assess all the application, all the information for immunity that the applicant provided, and then they are going to respond whether the application is immune from enforcement or not. If it's yes, then they need to tick which action should be taken, and if it's no, then they need to describe why the application is not immune, and they are going to take yes or no whether it has permitted development right. But let's say for this example that they will take that this application is immune from enforcement with no action taken within the 10 years. And they are going to provide a comment. This is 7 markers complete. And I'm not going to do all the other steps. I'm going to just do a draft recommendation. Yes. And I'm going to review and submit the recommendation now, so the reviewer can go and review it. This recommendation has been successfully submitted. I'm going to log out from the assessor, and I'm going to log in as the reviewer. And when I'm going to log in as a reviewer, in the review and sign off, I can now see another 2 pages. One is review evidence of immunity, which is a very similar page of what assessor did, whereas I'm going to accept of what they assess, or I'm going to return to the officer with a comment. Right now I'm going to say I accept it, which I'm going to 7 mark as complete, and then I'm going to review the assessment of immunity, and I can see here that assessment evidence of immunity, there are no any missing evidence. This is what the assessor respond, and I'm going to accept it. 7 must complete. And these are just the additional step we added as part of the immunity. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks for that, Evangelos. Everyone should be able to see the slides again now.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, thanks very much for that. If anybody has got any questions, just pop them in the chat, and you know, we'll try and respond to them as soon as possible. So next, we'll hand over to Rosanna for the user story mapping.
Yep. Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosanna. I'm a delivery manager working on BoPs. And as Holly mentioned earlier, we're now on the point of our roadmap where we are starting to look at the prior approvals application type, but we've prioritized 3 main ones. And so I'm just going to give a brief overview of our approach and how we're going to do this. So we're going to do, for those of you who don't know, we're doing a story mapping sort of approach to it, which helps us actually zoom out and see it from the bigger picture. So to see what steps in terms of the application needs to happen, and then actually start to think of it from the user's point of view of what kind of problems we need to solve, and also then actually help us see what we want to prioritize, because obviously we won't be able to do everything. Prioritize to what's essential and what's actually going to give the highest value, and also help us assess what risks they are. So it's sort of, as you can see here, we've done the first 2 activities of that process, which is to validate and the consultation, and mapped that out, and that's helped us prioritize what we would term as the minimum viable product, and then actually separated it out to what could make it better in the future and things we could consider in the future. So we've done these 2 first steps, and then the next steps we're going to do is obviously the assessor and review and sign off as well. So yeah, that's just to give you a quick overview of what that is, and I'm going to pass over to Celia.
Yeah, hi, I'm Celia. I'm a developer on BoPs. I'm going to be talking about our integration plan. So I think I talked about this a few show and tells ago, about how we were thinking about what BoPs needs to integrate with to be able to be used end to end. I talked about what we sort of did to get there, and now this is our kind of actual plan with what we're going to integrate with. There is a full report on this in slide deck form, which I've shared around the Slack a little bit, but if anyone else wants to see it, I can share it around again. So we've prioritized kind of 6 integrations. The first one is Camden's open data platform, which exposes Camden's planning history. It kind of does everything we need to do, but they don't expose UPRNs, which is kind of critical for BoPs. So what we're going to be doing is kind of having a look at Southwark, Lambeth and Buckinghamshire first, and then talking to Camden about how they could update what they have to fit in with what we need. The next one is data monitoring. So this is kind of things like, the reporting that councils use. So team officer caseloads and performance. We're having conversations with John Drinkwater about this. We think Power BI might be able to help us, but and we've used Power BI in other instances, but it's kind of not a priority right now. We need it once we've got prior approval functionality. So this is a bit later down the line. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is, the next one is integrating with planningdata.gov.uk/PlanX, who kind of do that integration with us for us already. When you update the red line boundary in BoPs, currently we can't say whether the constraints have been updated or if the constraints have changed, but we think we might be able to do this by sending the query back to PlanX. And we're currently building this right now, so that's exciting. Next slide, please. Yeah, receiving multiple application types. So obviously for BoPs to be used end to end, it needs to receive more than just LDCs. We've turned on prior approvals from PlanX to be sent to BoPs, so we can receive those now. We've started a conversation with Planning Portal, and they're currently building a JSON connector, which would be really great. We're still waiting on their documentation, so that's kind of on pause and a bit blocked until we get that from them. But once we've got that, we can start building up an integration with them. Next slide, please. yeah, this is a really big one, getting the planning history. We've got a bit of a stopgap solution at the moment where Power BI kind of takes out all the information from the current back office planning system and then posts it to our API, which the Planning Application API, or PAPI, a name that I really, really hate. We're working out if we can kind of schedule that so we can get updated history like once a day or something. And Ed from Bucks has been really helpful working on this with us. Some councils apparently have better spatial data than UPRN data and vice versa. So we think we've got it down for sort of UPRN data, but we need to look more into spatial data, as that's not really our forte. But PlanX has been really helpful chatting about that. So hopefully we'll learn a lot more about that. And we're currently, this is kind of obviously, yeah, it's not a brilliant solution, but John and Matt have talked with Uniform about whether they can build something for us to connect to. And they said they're looking into it, but it sounds like it's quite far down the line, and that just doesn't really work with our timelines at the moment. So we're trying to work our way around it, and hopefully in the future that might be something we can look into. And yeah, the final thing is integration with a document management store, which kind of implies like a register, essentially. Again, the kind of thing about integrating with Uniform not being a possibility at the moment applies. So we're deprioritizing that. And DLUC are leading on conversations around the register. There was a meeting last week. I don't know if a lot of people here went to that, but it sounds like a register, BoPs might be building a register. We don't know, it hasn't really been confirmed, but that'll unblock that as well. Thanks. I think that's it from me.
That's great. Thanks very much, Celia. That's all of the updates from BoPs. So next we'll go to Lam, who will give a bit of an update on the invite to pay user research.
Cool, thanks, David. Yeah, so hi, I'm Lam. I'm one of the user researchers for the PlanX, and today I'm going to share with you some of the finding highlights that we've collected from our user testing rounds on the invite to pay functionality, which from previous research, we know that it is a key functionality that the agent would really like to have with the new services. Cool. So in the last week and so, we have shown and spoken with 2 agents about the invite to pay functionality that we've designed. Next slide, please. Both of the agents are experienced in submitting all types of planning applications for their clients, and almost every single time they will nominate their client to pay for their application. Next slide, please. And so here, this is the kind of user journey that we have tested with our agent users. This time we conducted the research using a Figma mockup. We tested the invite to pay pages on the PlanX service itself, as well as the mockup notification emails that are part of the invite to pay journey. We also tested 2 paths of the invite to pay journey: the happy path, when a client pay on time, which is the one on the right-hand corner on the slide, and the unhappy path, when the client didn't pay on time, and how those are being communicated on the notification email. And yep, so here are some of the finding highlights we have learned on the pay for your application page. The immediate feedback we've got from the agents are that they didn't know the fees on the page is the final fees. They are, first of all, not aware that the PlanX service is for free, hence they ask if the fees shown on this page has already included service charge or VAT. Secondly, they did like to see a simple breakdown of the fees on the page, even though they did notice that there is the final how planning fees are being calculated link on this page, but they comment that having a simple breakdown on this on the same page will be very helpful for them. So on this finding, the team will review the content of this page and try add more clarity and explanation about the fee displayed on the page before we test the page again. So Yes, and this one here, another comment from the user on the same page is around the buttons. Users were presented here with two buttons. One is to pay for the application themselves, and the other is to invite someone else to pay. For both agents we test with, they like to invite their client to pay. However, the other button was highlighted in blue by default, which confused them a little bit at first glance, as if the service has already selected that option for them. On this, the team will play around with the design of the buttons and hopefully makes the tweak that will help improving this. And Peter, maybe driving it a little bit slowly, the change of side. Thank you. And sorry about that. And so currently with the PlanX service, after the invitation to pay is being sent, if the payment has not been received within 28 days, the application will be deleted. This is different from how it currently is on the planning portal. And so one of the key questions we have is to find out how does agent feel about this, and if the 28 days is a sensible time frame for deleting an application when the payment is not being received. And so we found out that although agents feel disappointed with the deletion and hope for some alternatives options such as an application on hold option, we are also being told that most of their clients tend to pay within a couple of days. So on this finding here, the team will observe how this goes once the functionality is live and continue to monitor how many applications will end up being deleted after the invitation for payment is being sent. So yes, next slide, please. Thank you. And onto the notification email. So besides the fact that both user would like the service to send another reminder email just 24 hours before the application is being deleted, which will be the plan anyway. One of the key comments we've got about these emails are that the branding on the email is confusing for user. While they were expecting to see a local authority branded emails reflecting the application, where the application is being sent to, but instead receiving the Gov UK branded email from a sender that are new, in this case, the digital planning service, to them were a little bit confusing. Well, this is a known issue that also shown up on our previous research. We are constrained by the Gov UK Notify, which doesn't allow local government to customize the match head. So the team on this one, I think the team will continue to monitor this and try to size how big a problem this really is when the new functionality goes live. So this is for me. I will pass on to Alistair to talk to us about the service group.
Thanks very much indeed, Lam. Hopefully you're seeing my screen. Cool. I'm just going to very quickly just talk about a sort of piece of work that's going on in the background, which is about sort of our ways of organizing as a project. It's a sort of eternal truth of digital transformation, that a lot of the transformation in digital transformation isn't actually about the technology at all. It's about how we organize ourselves, and that of course is often it's also one of the hardest parts, the most difficult bits. It's worth it really interestingly sort of just zooming out to this amazing piece of work which was done about 10 years ago now by GDS, which is where they thought about this from the perspective of essentially this concept of government as a platform. So if we really understand how digital government works, it helps us think about the roles and the teams that we need and how that it might be different from how we organize at the moment. And this is just a really great piece of work that still has loads of value and worth going and checking out. But they essentially conceived of digital government as effectively this sort of city or forest of services, all running on these common platforms like gov.uk Pay and gov.uk Notify and things like that, with sort of data at the bottom. Now, the key thing actually about this was that this piece of work, which is then go right in this future that we're moving towards, you have these platforms and you have these services, and so we can begin to think of with the teams that you need and the responsibilities that you might need around that service. In this case, they were looking at a service called Apply for a Fishing License, for example. So we can take that thinking and sort of transpose it into the way that we're thinking now about the planning services that we're building, except of course, there's a couple of differences. So the same principle of the idea that every digital service will need somebody who is responsible for it. We call them service owners rather than service managers, but it's the same basic principle. That still applies. But of course, because we're working at local government across PlanX, we're actually talking, there's going to be one of those in every single council. So this is sort of this interesting concept of it being almost like a club of these service owners. So all the people in the different councils who are responsible for this service, somewhat collaborating, especially at this stage, to kind of build these services. So that's a kind of interesting difference. Another interesting difference is that sort of, I won't say traditionally, but you know, hitherto in most areas of digital production, when we've talked about building a digital service, you've built a whole digital team around behind that service. So you have not just your service owner, but your delivery manager, service designers, user researchers, UI designers, and developers, right? Now, and that's cool. Of course, the other issue we have in planning is that planning is not just one service. Planning is this whole forest of services, and that really wouldn't work, right? We'd need loads and loads and loads and loads of teams with huge numbers of developers if we were hard coding every single one of these services, and every single time we needed to make a change to any of these services, it had to kind of go through the same process, and that had to be hard coded by developers, etc. So it would be crazy to try and even contemplate doing that across so many services, across so many councils. And so that's why we created PlanX as this sort of this platform that allows you to sort of build these services using common reusable components, kind of like Lego. And what that allows us to do is, in a way, to split the team, right? Because we can take off a whole bunch of those developers. That platform, that product has its own team, a product team, which has designers, developers, user researchers, etc. And behind that, a product group, which is the group of people from the councils as well who are using that product. That's a conversation for another day. And so we can kind of split off that piece of the work. And now where we got to is say, right, having split out the product group and the services group, we then had hitherto in this project this kind of big group that included a mix of the service owners from the councils, but also user researchers, content designers, flow designers, content researchers, etc., working on all these services. And that's how we've got to where we've kind of got to so far, building the first handful of services running on PlanX. But we've got to a point now where two things are happening. First, PlanX is at a point where we're ready to use these components to build out lots and loads of these other services across planning, which is a mixture of what are called statutory services. That's the services people have to provide, like apply for planning permission, and discretionary services. So those are the additional support services that councils provide to help people through the process, like find out if you need planning permission, or apply for pre-application advice and stuff like that. So there's this big long list, this kind of backlog of services that we want to build, right? And also what was happening is that more councils were joining the ODP program, and more councils were joining the ODP program. And so this group was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and yet kind of a bit bandwidth to kind of channel to our bandwidth of only being able to focus on a few key services at once. So in the last, and this is, you know, Matt and Delak have been doing loads of thinking, and we've all been doing loads of thinking together, and we're taking a kind of interesting risk, and we don't know exactly if it's going to work, but we're trying it, which is say, well, wait a minute, there's a kind of obvious thing we should try to do next, which is this, which is rather than having just one big all services group, to begin to subdivide that and break that into service groups, So there's a group of councils say, hey, we're particularly interested. We might ultimately, all the councils are probably going to end up using all the services, but we're particularly interested in building this one. And so hopefully it will begin to help with that bandwidth problem. And so we can kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom. Now, it doesn't, like every solution, it solves problems, but it also could create problems. So one of the problems it could create is there enough kind of sharing of knowledge sharing and kind of touch points for kind of best practice and solutions to be being shared between the groups. The other obvious problem is that actually there's loads of groups. We don't necessarily have a huge number of, for example, content designers, flow researchers, and user researchers for each one to have its own team. And maybe that wouldn't be that useful anyway, because again, you'd just be creating communication overhead between them all. That might be the future one day. So what we have at the moment is we do have a kind of, if you like, flying groups of those people who are hopping between the services, and we're particularly driven by the roadmap. We will, for the foreseeable future, be particularly focusing on some particular high priority services, which are the next services we really want to get out there, really spending a bit of time sprinting and focusing on a particular service, improving it, testing it, and so forth. But actually that hopefully doesn't need to be a blocker on other services that are just being built and tried out and tested and explored in the background, which I think is probably a perfect segue for me to hand over to Emily to talk about one example of that happening.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. For anyone who hasn't seen me on Show and Tells before, my name's Emily. I work in the digital planning team at Buckinghamshire Council, and yeah, kind of one of the sort of success stories I suppose we've sort of had of like working on this project is like these little offshoot services that are kind of like starting to sprout up from councils on the project. One example being a service that we've developed, which is about reporting a planning breach. So yeah, it's an online service that was actually not digital planning team's necessary idea. Our enforcement team actually came to us and said, this is a very Bucks specific thing. Bucks being a new council, it's been like 3 years. I think we're probably running out of time to be able to do that, but going from having 4 or 5 different ways for someone to report a planning breach, this project has sort of brought an opportunity for us to think about other tools and online services of ways to do that. So with all the work going on with PlanX, we were approached by our enforcement team to say, how about we try and do this for our report of breach? So how does the service work? It allows residents to report unauthorized work or anything that they are I guess concerned about that they can report to the enforcement team. This was developed quite quickly, definitely not probably to the same sort of extent of like user research and testing that other services on the team have done. We started off with the existing form and kind of converted it and launched the form on the 1st of May. So anyone who's sort of seen the back end of the PlanX, I'd still recognise what this is. This is, I guess, just to show how we've been able to use PlanX to write questions specifically to like the type of development that someone wants to report. And we were able to kind of quite quickly spin this service up using existing modules, things like find a property on a map, dynamic questions, all the different text, numbers, date components, etc. So a lot of the existing toolkit was actually very useful for building up this service and launching it quite quickly. And yeah, so it was quite a good example of a service to sort of take forward, for the first of which are sort of outside of the main scope of open digital planning services. Go to the next slide, please. So how does this service kind of work at the moment? The Lawful Development Certificate service has an integration with Uniform, but actually another way that PlanX forms can get sent to the council is through what's called the send to email functionality. What that does is someone completes an online form, they submit it, and an email drops to the council. And what we get is something that looks a little bit like what you can see on screen. It's a HTML format, which is great from a data to documents perspective, and it's kind of like an interactive application form. So this is what we're using. So the outputs of that form that you saw previously come to the council like this. This is all just test data going through, but shows how we can sort of present and package that information up to officers in a meaningful way. You don't have to have loads of questions that sort of have non-applicable or things that are like very generic. You can really kind of focus the questions to be very specific to the type of works that are being reported. and yeah, makes good use of automations and things. So we've had quite a lot of success with this. We've had over 160 submissions to our enforcement team so far using the form, which is very great. And just on the right, we have very easy access to analytics through all the PlanX services, so we can get an idea of like how many people are starting the service. So starting services doesn't necessarily mean like going through a journey and hitting submit, but we're seeing like a really great high amount of traffic on this service so far, which is really good. So in terms of like next steps, yeah, we've had 160 submissions. We're regularly checking in with our enforcement team and seeing if there's any sort of design iterations and tweaks we can make. We've already had a few, just to name some examples about restructuring those questions so that the application form, the most important information is at the top, is something that we've been working with our team to resolve. And also there's been times where we maybe need to ask for more detail about the breach up front, having that kind of like generic project type of like, I don't know, change of use. We have to, we've been working with our enforcement team to make sure we're asking more detailed questions where needed. As I said, this was a very basic sort of first form based off an existing web form that our team were using. So definitely, as we sort of move forward, we'd be really keen to look into what sort of we colloquially call them smarts. So that's how can we make better use of sort of data in these digital services, like make a better overall user experience. So for example, even though someone may be reporting a planning breach, that what they may be reporting actually may be completely fine from a planning perspective. So there may be an opportunity to almost combine this service with the check if you need planning permission service to kind of like, I guess, allow someone to have that information before they end up reporting something that is actually permitted by legislation. So that's just some of the ideas that we can sort of go forward with improving this service, but we'll be regularly checking in with the team, see if we can iterate on that. And thirdly, as this is kind of like a sort of spin out service, we're obviously working out in the open with open digital planning. Quite a few councils on the project have sort of, you know, expressed an interest in kind of working together on this. So hopefully kind of going forwards, we can collaborate with other partners on this to improve the service, and also means that they can, you know, pick up the service and roll out themselves. No need for everyone to be building separate reporter planning breach services. If we can sort of nail it the once really good, then it's something that people can, you know, kind of reuse. So it's a really kind of exciting opportunity to see these kind of like new services coming about, and also to see really great uptake by the public. So yeah, we'll continue to kind of work with the project on this, and excited to see what happens in the future. And I think I'll be passing probably back to David to do questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for that, Emily. Yeah, really interesting. I think it's testament as well to the way this project has worked, that we've been able to come up with that. You know, it's come from one of the council teams, and we've been able to develop the existing products to create that new service. So yeah, it's really good. Duncan has asked what developer input have you required from PlanX? Is that for the report of breach service, I assume, Duncan? Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, David. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So I'd say definitely for this version 1, we didn't need any additional dev work. We were able to use a lot of the existing work that had been done. But just to call out one example of a dev feature that would definitely be useful going forward is when people want to make reports against kind of whole buildings. At the moment, the address search kind of looks for example, if you want to make a report against a whole flat building, you have to kind of pick a flat within that building. So that's something that we'll be raising through the dev team, because there also may be use cases for planning applications to do that as well. So I wouldn't say it's like a complete deal breaker, but for the most part, things are very kind of they can be reused across the services. So thankfully, kind of minimal dev stuff needed so far, which is great.
Yeah, great. Thank you. There's no other questions coming through, but just to clarify on a couple of the earlier points that were raised, Rosanna has commented in the chat, but there will be invitations sent out for the consultation discovery on the 31st. But just to clarify, it is different to the show and tell next Wednesday morning. So if there's anybody that was previously on the invite for the show and tells and they seem to have dropped off the rota, just get in touch with any of us, and we can get you added back on. Contact details are on the screen now. So there's the project website. and you can contact any of the participating authorities at any of those email addresses there. But other than that, that's it. We've finished early today, and that shows what an efficient process we've got and what great work we've got from a team. So thank you everyone for joining this morning, and bye. Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.